Hello everyone, thanks for clicking the video. In this video, we're gonna take you all the way from the very beginning to get you started editing in Adobe Premiere Pro. We're gonna together learn how to make sequences, how to import footages, how to organize them properly, and how to set them in timeline for video editing. And you will also learn how to add transition between clips, text effects, motion effects, and then finally, of course, we learn how to render the video for productions. I bet it's gonna be a fun to watch. You will learn all the ins and out of it. So let's get started with it, shall we? Now I'm gonna launch here, of course, Adobe Premiere for the first time. If you haven't launched it, I'm gonna show you how to launch it. Now I'm using here Adobe Premiere Pro 2021 version. Of course, you won't have this splash screen of the Premiere Pro. I changed it to some workaround. Now, whenever you open up here Premiere Pro for the first time, you will see here this home screen where you can then, of course, create a new project, open the existing project, and all this. Now, this is a very basic stuff. Of course, since we are learning here the very basic of Premiere Pro, then we're gonna create here new project. Now, if you want to create a new project, all you have to do is simply click on this icon. Now, of course, I'm not gonna talk about this stuff because, of course, if you already know Premiere Pro, then of course you don't need to know it. You probably already know about this stuff. But for the very beginner, we're gonna create here a separate project from the very beginning. Now all you have to do is click on this new project, and then it's gonna show you these windows. Now here is a location, which means that where you want to create here this project. Now mine is already set to this project, which was the before project that I edited. And then all you have to do is click on this browser. You can rename this project to whatever you want. I'm gonna call this let's call this Premiere Pro Basic. Now then I'm gonna change here the location, of course, because now by default my location hasn't been set it here, but I'm gonna come to the location which is the Premiere Pro Basic over here. Now this folder I already made. You can set here whatever desired location you want. You can create here a separate one if you want, but I would like to preferably select it this one. So anyway, once you select this, then click on select folder. Now the location is set, and then of course these are the by default selected. You would leave it as it is, and then scratch this and ingest it. You don't have to play around with this unless if you want to go into that detail. But apparently if you have a good system with SSD and all this stuff, then you don't need to play around with this scratch disk and all this stuff. But for the beginner, you don't need to play with this. And then all you have to do is to click on this. Okay, now this is important, of course. If you have a dedicated GPU in your system, then make sure the CUDA is selected. By default, Adobe Premiere Pro, of course, selected the CUDA, but just in case if it's Mercury or OpenCL, if you are using here the AMD GPU, in that case you wouldn't see the CUDA, of course. But if you are using here NVIDIA GPU, then that would be by default select here CUDA. But of course that sounds a bit complicated. You don't have to worry about this, but just make sure the CUDA is selected, and then simply hit OK. Now once you create here the new project, and the Premiere Pro is gonna open up these windows. Now by default it might look convoluted to you and all this stuff, but we're gonna get you through everything. So what are workspaces anyway? Now by default Premiere Pro is a very professional application. You see, it's not just used here for video editing. It used here for film production, for music editing, for advanced color grading, and post processing, and all these. The film industry is using this application because, of course, it can do most of the job for film editor. So what are workspaces anyway? Now, whenever you open up here, by default, Premiere Pro at the very beginner, your workspace might be set here to essential or editing. Now, by default, since mine is set to Wajahat production, which I by default edit, but yours might set to editing or essential. Now, what are workspaces anyway? You see, as I told you earlier, is that Premiere Pro use her for all of this stuff, from all the way from video editing, for music editing, for film production, for color grading, and all these stuff that use her in film industry, they use it. So for every user, they have a different preferences, a different tools. This is why we have a different workspace to give the user experience and those tools they need. For example, if I'm advanced color grading, if I want to do color grading on my footage and all that, and I'm gonna click on this color, and then it's gonna open up here this lumetri color and all this tool, which of course is not appearing over here. But whenever you add here any of the import media, it's gonna show these color grading tools. But if you're only editing here the audio or adding effects, and then when you click on this effects workspace, it's gonna open up this essential and all of this stuff where you can then adding effects and production, all of this stuff. Now every user have a different preferences for the different purpose they use here Premiere Pro. That is why we have a different workspaces for every different user and their own preferences. So that's all about the workspaces. Now how to set your own workspace. Now first of all, I'm gonna add here, this is what is called the media panel, where you would put your media into Adobe Premiere. Now whenever you're editing here any footage, you would have to drag something in order to able to access all this panel, because this doesn't work without that. So I'm gonna add here a footage over here from my panel. Now this is a footage. Now usually when you're importing a media, you would have this import media to start. Simply all you have to do is to simply drag the media into this, and then it's gonna open that into Premiere Pro. And then of course you can see how we can then simply drag it into timeline. Now normally you wouldn't do it directly, because oftentimes if you are going into the messing with the frames resolution and all of this stuff, then you would have to create hash sequences. But just to show you, and then that's what I was talking about, is that whenever you select any of this media for the workspaces and all this stuff, you can see how this is enabled now. So how to create your own workspace? Now that might sound a bit of a convol. If that doesn't make any sense, that's okay. You will learn it, why we are using these panels and all of that stuff. That might seem a bit tedious to you, but let's create our own workspace. Now for example, usually my workspace is that I keep effects panel and the essential graphics panel, and then that's all I ever need, and I use her essential sound as well. Now you can see here mine is selecting effects, and I don't need the extra one. The lumetri coloring, I also use it for color grading though. So I'm gonna just close some of this extra by right click here on the library, and then click close panel, and then click on marker, and then the history panel I don't need, and the info panel. Once you're happy with this, you can drag all this panel just by simply, you can see here, you can even close these by right click here and then close panel, which you can then do it here and then playing around with that. Now once you're happy with these panels, you can drag around any of this panel you want. Like if the media browser you don't want that, just simply close it, because it's kind of, you want to make it more minimalistic and easy to access. Now once you're happy with the panel, lumetri scope, I don't use that too. I can close it if I want to. Now dragging panel is, of course, you can see here, you can drag anywhere any panel you want. Like over here you can drag it here, you can drag it over here if that's what you prefer. And normally I prefer to keep it over here on the right side, because that's make my life a bit easier while editing. So now once you're happy with the workspace, all you have to do is to click on Windows and then click on Workspace, and then save as a new workspace. You can call it whatever, but I'm gonna call here my new workspace. And then simply hit enter, and that's it. Your new workspace is created. Now next time whenever you launch our Premiere Pro, make sure you go to Windows and then select this import workspace from the projects. Now when you do that, whenever you create a new project, then it would automatically open the previous workspace, the one that you created. Now that's all about the workspace. I hope you get and understand what actually workspace and why we use it and how to create on for yourself. So we did talk about somehow about the panels, but we didn't explain what actually panel is. So, the basic thing is, the basic fundamental principle in Premiere Pro is that if you master the panels, you will know everything about Premiere Pro. Because panels are the things which perform a specific task. Every panel has its own task and its own rules in Premiere Pro. Now you see here we have this effects panel which allows us to apply effects on the timeline, and then we have the essential sound which would only work with the audio stuff, because whenever we have a music or audio voices we use here the essential sound. And then we have the lumetri color panel which allows us to color grade the panels when we want to color grade or applying some color effect to the panels. So let's understand how gonna use here any of the panel. You see, if you want to access any of the panel, you can go here to Windows and then you can see here all of this panel. For example, all of a sudden if you close this effects panel and then you become confused about where I'm gonna find this again, you see that's where the Windows things come in handy, where you can access here every panel that is Adobe Premiere Pro have. Now since we close here the effects panel, we're gonna click on this and it's gonna bring back that. Now, if you want to hide these workspace panel, all you have to do is right click and then click on minimize, and then we would have a bit more space to access it. Now, let's apply her effects. Now, of course, as I said, every panel has its own task and specific function in Adobe Premiere, but most of the time effects you would use a lot, because effects are the things that we apply to the every clips in timeline, whether that's the audio effects or video effects. So let's search here for the brightness and contrast effect, because this is where the easy part comes in handy. Now whenever you want to apply any of the effects, all you have to do is to simply drag that effect and then apply it on that video. And then once you apply it, simply select it and then you can see here it's gonna appear. Now once you apply this effect, you wouldn't see any of the impact because we just apply on that, on that clip. Now to see the impact and play around with that effect, that's where we come in handy the effect control. You see, we have these effects, which is the effects panel. However, to control these effects, you would have an effects control. And that's how we can access it. Every single clip that we have on timeline, whenever we select it, it will reveal this, that we have these effects applied on this video clip. You see here we have applied here the bright and contrast that was applied. Now these stuff that you see here, the volume, the opacity and motion, these are by default Premiere Pro added to every single video clip, and to audio only this this volume area, because video has audio too, so that is why it has all of this. Now you see here we have this brightness contrast is added because that's how we edit. Now let me delete this again just to show you how this panel actually works. And whenever you simply drag it here, you see here we have no any effects. I'm gonna drag this and you can see here it's appear in the effect control. Now here we can control here these effects by playing around here with this contrast and then brightness and all this stuff to make it. Now this is just one example. Of course you can apply multiple of stuff you want. Now except of the video transition, of course, because that is a transition, not effects, but it comes where you can most of them control it from over here. But anyway, let's add here curve adjustment, because why not? That is often used here in Photoshop. I'm gonna add here the luma curve to it, and you can see here we have this luma curve already in the effect control, where we can then control this luma curve to play around with the the effects panel and all of this stuff, because then we can control that effects from effects panel. So yeah, I think that's all about the effects. Now if you want to delete any of the effects, you would always come to the effect control. Now just in case if it's somewhere else, I already told you, you can just simply drag anywhere you want where you're comfortable. But normally the standard way of editing is that we keep it in the left top corner, so that's how we can access it. Now if it's not appear, you can always click on this effect corner, it will appear just in case if it is closed. So yeah, I think that's it. If you want to delete this, simply hit delete button or click on clear, and then it's gonna disappear that effect. So that's all about the panels. So yeah, let's now talk about which one we would use here in our project. Now oftentimes, of course, if you're an advanced user, you would need each and every one, because every panel has its own rules and own function. But most of the standard editing, if you are doing here, you would need here the essential graphics panel, which is related to the text and all of that stuff. We're gonna talk about this essential graphics, but right now just remember that we would need this. And we have the source monitor, and we have the effects control, and these effects control, and luminosity color. Now these are the very basic that we use for the basic video editor. That should be enough. But of course, as we move along with the tutorial, we're gonna talk about most of the professional users that you use here. So now let's talk about how to import media properly into Adobe Premiere. Now we talk about the basic stuff, but let's talk about media, because that is very important. Now of course I'm gonna delete by default one, because that's not the way it should be. You're gonna properly start editing. So how to import media? Now basically, normally what you would do here, you would drag here the file to the import media. Now you see here, this is what is called the Premiere Pro project. If you go to Windows and then click on the projects and then Premiere Pro Basics, that is our project name, because that is where you would import your media and then applying effects on it. Now since we haven't added any of the media to our panel, so what we can do here is double tap on this, then it's gonna give us this file explorer where we can select it. And then we can select here these projects. I'm gonna select these 4 footages, which is for pixel.com. So what you can do here is then click on open, and then it will import all of these 4 clips. Now it's very important is that you understand this panel, but let's just show you some tips and tricks. Now whenever you open her video clips, you can hover the mouse over it, and it's gonna show you the preview of how the clips look like. Of any of the footages over here, you just have to hover over the mouse over it, and it's gonna show the clip of it. And similarly this one, then you can just play around with it, and this one, the nature one. Now here is a good trick. Now every panel that you see here, if you want to full screen it, you can press the back roll key on your keyboard. It's the first key right to the not to the right, to the left, to the one button on keyboard. So if you tap here, it's gonna full screen that panel. Now this is just not the one panel though. If you click on or hover mouse cursor over here and click the back roll key, it's gonna full screen that. But I'm gonna show you that later. But right now I'm gonna use you with that, make your habit on how to use it to make you more productive. Now once you open up here into the timeline, it's gonna kind of create here this mess. I'm again pressing the back roll key. So we want to kind of properly organize it, because footages and music and all this stuff, you have to bring them together into the media, because these videos are not the thing in production. We have music, effects, sound effects, so we want to properly organize it. Now organization it's very important, because oftentimes your projects gets bigger and bigger, and you want to organize it just in case it's not very distractive. So finding files become very heavier. So that is why what I recommend here is that if you have video footage like this, assume that you have, if you're a content creator or anything like that, what I do usually is create a new bin. New bin is like a new folder, and then you can simply, let's call this footages. And then when you hit enter, it's gonna create a separate folder. All you can do here is select all of this and then drag this to the panel, and now we can access this within that folder. And now you can close this if you want, but we have a separate panel. Now another thing is that whenever you open up here, you can bigger this thumbnail if you want. This is a very simple stuff. You can click on this icon to show them in list if you don't like that thumbnail view. But yeah, I preferably kind of keep it that way because it's kind of minimalistic, and I can literally understand what the clips actually is if I have to manually edit each and every one of it. So that's all about the importing. Now I'm gonna import here music as well because music is gonna come in handy a lot to me, and we're gonna together edit here one video. Now I have music here of Accent1217. By the way, he's an awesome artist and creating amazing, and they are absolutely free. So what I'm gonna do here is drag that music over here, and then it's gonna open that in the project panel. So as I said here, since this is a music, if you are making a videos, make sure you create here a folder for that just to properly organize the stuff. And then I'm gonna drag that music over here to the folder so that later I can use it. Now I have a music too, so now we are ready to create her sequence. So what is sequences in Premiere Pro? Now sequence is very important thing because sequence are the thing that allows us to compile the whole video for the final production. Now let me show you what I mean by that. Now I'm gonna open up here my trailer that I recently made. It's just a kind of a vlog video, but I'm gonna show you what sequence really is. So here is the sequence. You see, this one is just I made here recently for my Fiverr profile, and you can see here this timeline is a bit convoluted, and the whole thing is compiled into one sequence, which then allows us to put ahead all those effects, video, and all this stuff into to compile and make the video for final production. And that is why sequence is very important. You create here sequence which then allow you to put all those footages or VFX, the effects of that audios, the transition and all this, you do it inside that sequence. And that sequence is also called a timeline, you could say, because that's where you would allow it to create your own all this effect. And this whole, you could say, is called timeline, but that timeline is within that sequence, which means that that sequence is more likely the parents of it, and this timeline we are accessing within this timeline allows us to put in that sequence this whole VFX. I mean by VFX mean the whole effects that we are applying, the videos and all these clips together to make the video. This is a whole sequence. I mean, simple sequence means to have this stuff consecutively together. Now that's how the Premiere Pro, we're gonna learn how this sequence is used and why we are using it. I'm gonna close this by clicking the close panel, and also I'm gonna click this little button which is, but let's just keep it open. So how to create a sequence? Now all you have to do is to simply right click here and then click on new item and then click on sequence. Now pretty much if you're a beginner, now oftentimes I made that mistake back in the day, but if you're editing here 1080p as a 30 because that is a standard 30 fps, so all you have to do is to click on this digital SLR and then click on 1080p. That is if you're kind of doing casual editing for however, depending on your camera, if you kind of sure about this like ProRes and IDTV or Canon, in that case of course it depends on your camera. If you are shooting at that footage, you can definitely create the sequence for that, but it totally depends on your choice. However, if you are editing a content creator, then I would suggest that you go with digital SLR and then 1080p, because it follows the standard ratio 16:9, which I oftentimes the YouTuber use here for their production. So yeah, if you select this 1080p, which means it has a 30 fps, which is about fps, right, is like per second 30 frames of that video. Now this is not just limited. If you want totally customize, if you want to customize this setting, you can come over here to the setting, and then you can change here the resolution even to 4K. Like 4K has a resolution 3840 and 2160 if you want to edit in 4K, of course. But if you want, I mean, if you know about what I mean all this, but that's how you would create it if you want to. However, in this case we're gonna create her 1920 by 1080 because that is the most standard one. And if you want to change her the the frames per second, you can then of course select her this 60 frame per second, which you can then edit if you have videos in your 60 fps. Then once you create her, because depending on your video footages, if it is in 60 fps, then of course you would have to create her sequence as a 60 fps. However, if it is it's in 30 fps, then of course you don't have to kind of create a 60 fps per 30, because that's gonna look chubby, more likely sluggish on those in the timeline. So let's just keep it 30 for now, because that is a standard one, and every video that you see on internet, they are in 30 fps, most of them. Now once you happy with the setting, and then you can rename this sequence. Now let me just call this let's just call this Premiere Pro Basic, and then simply hit OK. Now that we created her sequence, you can see here we have this timeline. We can then, what we can do here is open that footages folder and then simply drag all those. Now if you want to create here directly, you don't have to drag it, because oftentimes if you have a long videos, we would have to kind of trim that video, because you want to take certain part of the video and then put it into the timeline over here. And that is where come here the source monitor. So let's talk about source monitor. So what is source monitor anyway? Now whenever you double click on this video, it will open up in this source. Now the source monitor is allow you to manipulate that certain footage according to your need. Now here is important thing. You see, I want a part of this footage, like if I want to this part of this footage, then what I want to do here is click on this icon, which is the mark in. And then if I want to, where I want to end that part of that footage, and then I would mark out. Now Premiere Pro would allow me to select the certain part of the video directly and then drag it into the timeline. And that is why source monitor come in handy a lot. Now this is not just for video, by the way, it's for audio too, where you want to select a certain part of the video, you would create here this mark in and mark out. Now here is a marker, which is a bit of an advanced stuff since we are going into the basic, but I'm gonna show you too. Now the marker is kind of if you have a multiple area, you want to select a multiple area of the footage. For example, I want to select this part of the I want to select this part of the video, and then I want to end it here, and then I would add here a mark 2, and then that's where we can then put ahead this. Now once you drag that into the panel, you want that part of the video. Now it's gonna ask you that this clip doesn't match the sequence setting. Change sequence to the match clip setting. Now it depends. You see, if you're targeting videos in 1080p and you want to keep it that way, like in 1080p, then you would have to click on the existing setting. However, since probably if that video is in 4K and you want to edit in 4K, then you have to click on change sequence again. Now what I do suggest though is that if you're editing multiple if you have some videos in 4K and some in 1080p, in that case of course you would have to use 1080p, because you can't edit 1080p clips in 4K, because that would be upscaling that video, which would look kind of creating artifacts, and it wouldn't be original because you're upscaling 1080p to 4K. Now in this case, assume this is a 4K video and my sequence was 1080p. So, and I'm thinking that this is this project that I see here, it's in 1080p and some of them in 4K. So what I do suggest here is that I'm gonna keep existing setting. Now you see here, this wasn't a 4K, I would say, but the fact is that it has a different it is 30 fps and we create it at 29 fps. But that doesn't have to be like that. If it were a 4K, then in that case I would show you what you would have to do and how to properly fit it into the frame. Anyway, so you were talking about this marker, right? So now that we imports this certain part of the clip into the timeline, we can then, if you want to select this part of the timeline, and then I would mark this, and then I would want to select this part of the timeline, and then I would mark this. Then I can put ahead this and then drag this timeline to this marker, which means that it's kind of a note taking where you keep track of the whole footage and you want to keep it between this area of the marker and this area, showing you where to put that slider. And then if you want to move this slider, which showing you in real time, you can then follow along with that, and then simply drag this part of the timeline, and then you can see here we have separate clip together. This is how the marker use here. Now this is important in and out where you want to kind of trim between the clips. But yeah, I think that's all about the source mode. Now these are the stuff is if you want to get back to left frame, and this is the right frame if you want to get back, and this is if you want to kind of dragging around, shifting if you have a multiple. I mean, our time we don't use this go to shifting, but yeah, I guess if you kind of select this part of the area, then you tap here, it would point into that thing. But yeah, I mean, you don't have to, if you think dragging would be a bit of a hard for me, you can click on this too. It will kind of drag into the timeline, but you won't have that manual control unlike you would do it, and you can even override it with that panel if you want, and it's gonna come above. But usually manually is preferred when you're selecting it. Now this is the source monitor. Of course, source monitor is very important, and that's how you use it. If you want to drag another clip, all you have to do is double click on this and then you would open it. Now if you don't want to kind of trim or don't want to take a certain pattern of the video, you can simply directly drag it into the timeline. That won't be a problem though. However, since most of the time if you are shooting with the camera, you would have to double click on this and then select some certain part of the video to put it into the timeline, and then you're gonna drag that into the timeline. Now there is important thing, you see, every video has its own audio too. If you click on this, it's gonna show you that video part of it. If it has its own audio, you're gonna click on this, it's gonna show you that audio part. If you want to grab that audio of that part, then you can switch between that. Now in this case I want to grab this part of this, then I'm gonna grab this into the timeline. So now you would have this separate things like this smooth transition and this one. It's not a smooth transition, we cannot talk about transition though, but right now I want you to understand source monitor because it's very important. So yeah, I guess that's all about the source monitor. Now let's talk about the specific layers timeline. You see, these things that you see here, V1, V2 and V1, these are the layer that is only would allow you to put ahead your video clips. Now let me show you. Now I'm gonna close this footage folder because these are videos, and then I'm gonna come over here to the music bin. This was a music, right? So if I start to drag it over here to the timeline, it won't drag it here because V1, V2, these are the layer that is only for videos. If I wanted to drag here the audio, that whether it can be a voice, it can be a music, it can be a sound effects or anything, you would always drag into this here, and then that's gonna reveal it here, that audio over here. So yeah, that's pretty much a basic of it, but it's very important. Now let me show you one thing here, the targeting tracks, but we're gonna talk about that later. Right now what I'm gonna do here is just to give you the very basics of it if you never ever use the timeline, because it's really very important. Now if you want to create here, just in case if you have a very massive timeline, a lot of footages, what you can do here is right click here and then click on add tracks, and you can add more of the tracks if you want to kind of stack together. Like, now the layer is very important. Let me show you one trick if you've never been into the layers. Now in timeline, whenever this is called scrubbing, and this is the slider which allows us to show the real preview, and this is called RAM preview. This is a source monitor and we have all RAM preview. Now in source monitor we have this 1/2 which is called the playback resolution. If you have a low end system, which means that the footage is very high, you don't have to play it in full or 1/2 1/4. What I do suggest though is that if your system can smoothly scrub through the videos, then in that case 1/2 should be enough. However, if it's kind of sluggish in this playback, you can always keep it to 1/4, because it would be very smooth to play back whenever you click on this. So yeah, that's what it all means. Now I usually keep it 1/2 because it can handle it, my system can handle it. Now whenever you have layers and this timeline, which means after this layer we would have this layer that allows us to kind of another layer, and then that's where we have this layer of the subject. However, if I put this above this tag, then it's gonna show this above video layer instead of because that's how the layer works. If we have the above clips, then it's gonna show the top one clip in the timeline and the low one end would be hidden. Now think of it as a box. For example, this is a box and this is another box. If you put it that box over here, then only we can see that box. The downward would be hidden. That's how the layer works. And since we have 2D, in real world we have 3D, we still see it, but in 2D that's how we have timeline, and then we only see the certain part of it. But yeah, that's what I was talking about. You can still create here the add art tracks, but this is just the basic. But we're gonna talk about this track making and all this stuff. But right now I want you just to understand the very basics of layers. So what are the basic tools in Premiere Pro? There is not a lot of tools in Premiere Pro. To understand them, it's gonna take 5 minutes to understand all of it. So here we go. Now the fact is that whenever we have footage in a timeline, you can see here we have this timeline and we are scrubbing through it and showing it in the monitor. Because the fact is, if we have selected this tool, which is called the selection tool, these tools allows us to select these footages and these footages and this. The name is pretty self-explanatory, and that is why if we have a music, let's just drag a music over here, you can then use this tool to select the clips from the timeline. If I select here this tool, it won't allow me to select this. You can select it, but that's multiply selecting it. So it's more likely you have a control with the timeline to select the stuff, the clips on the timeline when you are using here the selection tool. Which, by the way, I always recommend that you remember here the shortcuts, because it's kind of make your productivity a lot faster while working in editing. So V is for that. Now this is, I guess that's all about the selection tool. Now let's talk about how the track selection forward tool. Now the track selection forward tool allows you to select the entire track. Now this is the single one is called a track. If I select here this, you can see here it's gonna select all of these tracks on this timeline, right? If you hold it, the left button of your mouse, it's gonna say track select forward tool, which means it's gonna select all of these tracks when you in the direction where the arrow is pointing. Let me show you. If I kind of let me just drag it over here this, and yeah, so what I'm gonna do here is again select this tool, and then if I select it, it's gonna select all these clips on this direction. That is why it's called the track select forward tool, the forward tool, all of it. If I select it over here, it's gonna select this one too. Now if it were have been multiple, let me show you. I'm not doing trimming here, but just for the demonstrator to give you the understanding, let's just trim this and this and Let's just trim this here too. Now if I select again this tool, which is the track select for tool, and now if I select this, it's gonna select all these clips on the timeline in the forward direction, which is the right direction where the arrow is pointing. Now we have the second tool, which is the track select backpath tool. It's doing the same thing but in opposite direction. If I You can see here we have this arrow direction and this direction, which means towards the left. If I wanted to select here, I would just simply click and it's gonna select all of it. Now oftentimes, I mean, in the beginning when I was starting Adobe Premiere, I was making mistake of selecting manually, I mean using the selection tool by something like that and then dragging it. Now if you have a very complex, a lot of timeline, then selecting this manually was a lot of hassle and was also consuming a lot of time. But if you want to select here the certain part of the timeline in this direction, then you can use here this track back button, which allows you to select this part, and if you have click on this area, it's gonna select the entire path, entire all these clips and on the left direction. So that's how it works, and that one is in the right direction. So what is ripple editor? Now ripple specifically in Premiere Pro, it means that we have a blank spaces between the clips, whether that's footages or music. But let me show you what does that even mean. You see, oftentimes when we try to kind of trimming something, we would normally select here this tool and then drag this. It's gonna show you the timeline, how much you have trimmed, and then you would have this blank space. And that space, normally what a beginner would do is then drag and select all of this clip and then drag it into the timeline and then again drag it to the timeline, and it's kind of time consuming. I mean, the fact is literally we have a good tool for that, we can use it. Now I'm going to show you how to do it faster way. What you can do here is grab this ripple tool, and then what you can do, if you want to trim this clip, which is this, and then want to transit into the next one, which is this one, what we can do here is usually what we would do is to grab this, and it's gonna automatically delete that for you. I mean, let me show you what I mean. If I normally what would do, if I wanted to trim this part, you would have this blank space and then you would have to move around again. However, in the case of ripple delete, what you can do is that simply select this, and then you can do here is that when it's showing in this left direction, which means that now you have the control to select this clip and then trim it by dragging it, and it's can automatically fill that gap for you. Now it can be for anything. I mean, if I have to do it for this one, now normally if the clip is already ended, of course in that case it won't work, but let me show you. In this case, if I wanted to stretch this one, it's can automatically fill that gap. However, if you have multiple footage, in that case it won't work. But I guess that's how you would have to select it. And it's work on a single track, but in that case we work on the music, so that is why we gap that. Now let's me press here Control Command Z to go back into the previous state. That's how you would undo it anyway. So yeah, that's all about the the ripple. Now we're gonna come back to that if that doesn't make any sense to you, but for right now just remember that it is used how to remove the blank spaces without while trimming the footage on the timeline. Now what I'm gonna do here is come to the next tool, which is called the rolling edit tool. Now what the rolling edit tool is actually doing is stretching the clip. You can see here it's showing this multiple stretching the edit while pushing and trimming the next one. But just to show you that the rolling edit is kind of you are stretching this one, not stretching, but increasing the length of it while trimming the the next one. Now this is how it's actually working. Now that might die, if that doesn't make any sense to you, you can play around with that timeline. Now what we have been doing here, we have this music as well. Now oftentimes if you have these cuts, if you do it accidentally, you can always, that's a simple trick, but let me show you. If right click here, you can join through edit, and then you can see here it's gonna remove all that. But yeah, I guess that's all it. Now here is another tool which is called the rare stretch tool. Now in this stretch, what we tend to do here is that we are trying to stretch the whole track. Now what I mean by that, if I have this clip and I wanted to stretch it, by stretching mean playing around with the timeline. You can see here it has original timeline. It's gonna slow it by you can see here normal speed was 100%, but if I stretch it, it's gonna make it slow. Now you can see here slow. The original one was like this one normally playing where this subject is going. Now if music is sometimes distracting you and you want to disable it, we have this mute button for that too. All you have to do is to click on this mute, and then it's gonna mute the music. Now you can play on the timeline, it won't distract you. So yeah, I guess that's it. Now if you wanna click want to make it visible, you can again click on back that too. So stretch tool apparently mean is that you're playing around with the time of that. Normally the video has I'm gonna mute this because it's kind of distracting me while recording. So you see here that normally clip has 100% speed, which is a normal speed. But if you want to make it slow, you can then use her this rare stretch tool, which you can then increase to how much time you want by you would have to move that slider, which is called the scrubbing slider, and then play ahead and then play around with the timeline. Now you can see how it's make it that slow. But however, let me show you that trick too, because oftentimes it will come in handy. You see here the video is kind of chubby and sluggish, because the fact is whenever you are making and slowing the video, if it have it would have been 60 fps, then it wouldn't have that much of a problem. However, since we have 30 fps video, which in the beginning you remember we created a sequence which were having a 30 fps, but in this case we are trying to stretch it, and that is why we have this sluggish experience of that. However, we have a good trick in Adobe Premiere. Now I believe this is available in 2017 and above version, but let me show you. If you have the latest version above 2017, then that's a good thing. Now you can see here this, it's not looking good, that slow motion, is it? What we can do here is tell Adobe Premiere to generate some frame for us to make the experience more smoother. Now this doesn't work on every clip though, because it's kind of generating those frames, but most of the time that should be enough. You are not pushing or not making a video a lot slow. So right click here and click on speed duration, and you can see here we made that 4 times slower, because the original was 100% and it has a 25%. Now time interpolation, and then click on optical flow. Now we are telling Premiere to generate frames and feel that remove that sluggishness by injecting on frames. Now if I hit OK, you can see here we have this red timeline. Now that apparently means that this video is not gonna play slowly. However, in my opinion, it's not a big deal. If you are experiencing lag still, what you can do here is select this timeline. If you have this red, and if your timeline it's the RAM preview is not that smooth, what you can do here is select this clip and then click on sequence and then click on render selection. Now it's gonna render the whole video to give you that smooth RAM preview in the in the preview monitor. Now it's rendering it, but let's just wait for it. Now you can see here it's turning into green. Now we have now let's just play the video, and you can see here we have smoother experience. Now it doesn't lag because Premiere Pro inject that into the timeline by with that footage. Good and awesome trick. I mean, I believe this is a very back in early day when I was studying Premiere, it was a very kind of a hidden, I would say, trick to understand that. But yeah, now since we talk about here the rare stretch tool, let's come over here to the treasure tool. Now this is one of the simplest and one of the most usable that you would use. Now oftentimes what we do here is that we want to trim the footage on a certain point. Then you press C or grab the razor tool. Now, if you want to learn editing, as I already mentioned, make sure you learn all these shortcut. When you are get used to it, it's not gonna take that much of effort in remembering. But the shortcut is C. I usually press in keyboard, and then when you hover over this, I have this playhead on this area, position of this footage. Then I'm gonna grab this razor tool which I already have, and then if I hover over, as you can see here, it's showing that by if I click here, it's gonna trim that video. If I select this one and then click this, it's gonna trim that too. Now this is that you are trimming the videos, and then you can separate it if you want. That you can do it for music, for everything. Now here is a good trick. You see, whenever we select here this razor tool, we want to trim that clip. However, in some cases, but most of the time, you want to kind of trim the entire timeline. In that case, if you hold shift, it's gonna reveal that line, which means that whenever you cut any of this, it's gonna impact the whole timeline while cutting it. Now if I press here, click on my left mouse button, it's gonna trim the whole music as well. However, this is a very simple timeline. In cases of you have multiple videos like this, assume that you have this, such a complex timeline, something like that, and then you wanna cut some, wanna trim some certain part of this. And let me join this just to show you. And you want to cut this part and these video clips, and you don't want to cut this. Now if you don't know about this trick, what you would do normally is click this, and then click this, and then click this. Now this is not the efficient way. There is a better way and faster way. Now let me press Ctrl or Command Z to get back reverse that trimming. Now what I want here is a great trick. Whenever you lock this, which means that you are telling Premiere Pro to restrict all this tool to not impact this track of the timeline. Whenever you lock, as I mentioned, I don't want to impact my razor tool this track and this track while cutting it. So what I would do here is then lock this by coming over here, and then it's not gonna impact. Now if I hold shift and then click on trim, it's gonna trim it, while the rest of it won't impact. But if you want to whenever it's locked, you can't even move it, then you can unlock it again and then play around with it. Now we have this well, that's a good trick. Now right? It's a mess. So let's press Ctrl or Command Z to delete all this, and we're gonna move into the next tool, which is the slip tool. Now what is exactly a slip tool? You see, we have this music. If I zoom this, now these two sliders that you see here is used here to zoom the video timeline, and this slider is used here to zoom the audio timeline, the tracks. Now every music that you see here has a specific wave, which you can see here. It's called the audio graph or the audio spectrum in simple terms. Now since it is mute, let's start now. Now let me show you the demonstration of it. Now what I'm gonna do here is let's just play the audio just to give you the example of how this slip tool actually work. Now I'm gonna play it. You hear that music, right? How it was started. Now what does this slip tool do? It's actually slipping this whole audio in towards the left. Now what I mean by that, if I start to drag it towards the left, I'm holding on the left key of the mouse, you can see here it's pushing that music toward the left, which means that we are going in the forward direction of that music and then putting that right away in the timeline. You can see here the music would start here in the middle because we pushed that timeline of that music toward the left to trim it. Now the music would start, uh, you know, 20, I believe it was 20 second backward in the timeline. Similarly, it is for the video too. When you push it, it's gonna, you see here it's showing that the starting was like that, the one in the left, but when I slip it, it's gonna look like that backward. I mean, 5 second, in 7 seconds, it's gonna look like that if I, slip it 2 second. Now you would hear how the music is 25 second in the forward direction. So that's all about the slip tool. Let's come over here to the slide tool. So what actually slide tool do? It tend to push the into the push the kind of slip the video while maintaining the rest of it. See here we have some of the video remain, but what we can do here is kind of adding that while trimming the right and trimming the right one and stretching the left one. That's how the stretching works. You see, I am in the left one is stretching and the right one we are trimming. It's simple as that. I mean, oftentimes we don't use this. We use our slip tool, but we don't use that much of a slide tool in time. How about the pen tool actually? Now, pen tool is very advanced. If you know and learn this, I guess you would also, it will make your life easier in Photoshop. But actually, pen tool is used here for the selecting a specific path or the subject. Now, I'm not gonna go into the detail though because since it's a very beginner, but just to show you how it is used. Now, as I probably you remember that keyboard shortcut which was the backroll key. If I hover my cursor over on the RAM preview monitor, it's gonna full screen it. Now I wanna select using the pen tool, and I wanna select this subject. What we can do here is and you can use here to select the entire subject. Now of course this might not be the perfect way I'm selecting, but just to remember it is used here for masking and then to kind of restrict the Premiere Pro tools to impact a certain part of the frames. And then it used here in green screen too. I mean in certain effects if you want to select it, you can see here we have selected this area. And now the pen tool we are telling Premiere Pro to kind of play around with this, and you can see here we have this frame and then we can play around with the effects panel. So yeah, let me show you why we use this. I'm gonna again add here the brightness and contrast. If I select here and go to the effect control, which I believe you remember, right? So let's come over here to the effects. I'm gonna press this button and let's come over here to the effect control. Let's just play around with this and then let's reduce the opacity. Now by the way, this is not the way ideally you would use it, but this is just to show you that with masking tool we are tend to kind of restricting the whole certain part of the frame by using pen tool. So pen tool will come in handy a lot. I mean if you're an advanced user want to know, you definitely it come in handy, but normally in usual way we don't use it unless you're editing every bit of that thing. Similarly the rectangle tool which we make similar the masking of the certain part of the video. It's like a pen tool, but pen tool allow you to manually select the entire things or object in the frame, but rectangle tool allow you to select it using rectangle, and similarly is the ellipse tool. So yeah, what about the hand tool? Hand tool obviously is used here to drag the timeline. So yeah, I mean this is pretty, if you have timeline and then you want to zoom it, you can drag it using this pen tool. What about the zoom tool? Zoom tool is used here to you know zoom the timeline by stretching it, but if you hold alt or option you can then zoom out the timeline. Similarly, as I said, this tool we use here to manipulate and play around with the timeline. I'm holding alt, as you can see here it's changed from plus to minus, by allowing me to zoom out the timeline. And then we have finally similarly the text tool, which is allows us to type here selection on this stuff. And then you can see here, let me just type here. Now let me remove the, by the way, this the the one that we made here. Now let's just let's just delete this too. We have this video. Now I'm gonna delete all this timeline. Let's make a short video, shall we? Now I'm gonna go ahead to the footages and then bring these footages into the timeline, and then bring these footages into the timeline, and bring these footages into the timeline. I guess 3 is enough, right? And we have 16 seconds of video. So we have this. Now what I want here is that want to add text into this part. So let's select the type tool and then type here a beautiful night Iceland. I mean, I'm just writing it, probably it might not be Iceland, who knows. But once you type here the text, you can then use here the move tool to select the text and then scale it by using these bounding boxes, and then you can then play around with this. So you can see here, whenever you create here text, we have this random graphics tool. Let's just delete this, and then you can see here we have separate layer for the text. I'm gonna drag this into the timeline, and you can see here we have this text. Beautiful. However, how to change the time, the fonts and all of that? For that, we're gonna use here the essential graphics, which allows us to manipulate the text. Which is, if I click on this, it's gonna open this. You can see here we have already this text. I'm gonna select this text, and then I want to make it into the center, horizontal center, and then vertical center. And we have this, let's just use her roboto for now, a font one, and yeah, I guess that's all it. Of course, you can play around with it by increasing the size by all this setting if you want here this. But yeah, I guess this is a very basic stuff, so definitely you can play around with this if you want that. Now I'm gonna grab here the music, by the way, so let's just grab it into the timeline and then see what we can end up with. Now I'm gonna trim that music by using razor tool, as I told you already. So let's just click on this. So I guess that's solid about the tools. Now let's talk about the transition shortly. Now we talk about all the basic tools and all that stuff, which is, you probably know now, we have this timeline that we left. Now what is transition? Transition means that we are kind of giving effect between two clips, just to give the impression to not look them weird. You see, this between this clip and this clip, there is no transition. If I start to play, let me kind of mute the audio first. If I play the audio, there is no transition. I want to give transition to make them nice, and that's where I would come here to effects and then click on video transition. Now by the way, you might don't have this film impact transition because it's a third-party transition, but normally if you install Premiere, you would have this vibe transition and all this. However, if you want here by default transition, if you select the selection tool and right click here and then click on apply default transition, it's gonna give that transition by default, and then if you play it, it's gonna give that smooth transition between the tracks. And you can apply here this too if you want, like Now I want to kind of reveal this text over here, but in a way of kind of fading it out. You see, this text abruptly appear. So I want them transition. I would simply right click here and then apply default transition. It's gonna reveal that like cinematic. And you can drag this text layer by playing around with this. Now I'm gonna again unmute the music, see how that it looks like. Now, this was the default transition, by the way. If you want to add your own transition, you can then search here and play around with this. So let's just see here the cross zone. Let's just add this and see how that looks like. Now, that's how you would edit. You can simply search it here too. I mean, like for example, the linear wipe is a transition or something like that. But yeah, let's apply here default. And you see here another trick. You can apply transition to the audio too. You can see here this audio ends, very abrupt. So you want them smooth transition. You want the smooth transition. So what you can do here, right click here and then click on apply default transition. And similarly on the video too, because it's ends abruptly to give them smooth experience. Now in the starting of audio, usually it tend to start very slowly, so it's not a big deal. But if you're in the kind of taking a certain part, the middle part of audio, you can apply here to give that a final smooth transition to the starting of the audio. Now let's make this part a bit slowly. Now not slowly, but not this footage. Let's make this footage a bit slowly to make the video a bit longer. Now this is a 30-second video, but we can stretch it. Right click here and speed duration. I'm gonna reduce the speed duration to 25%, as we already did that with the stretch tool. Let's just do it, and then optical flow to generate that frames in the timeline. So yeah, let's yes, that's, you can stretch it more if you want, right? And also stretch the music because we are having that. And let's see how that look like. Now if you want to duplicate the layer of text, like in this case we have this text, all you can hold Alt or Option in keyboard and then drag that into this area. You can see here we have separate text on this line, and then you can edit this by double click on this and then click on Essential Graphics and click on this effect, and you can edit here. Let's call this Nature Beauty or something like that. And then of course you can adjust it to the point where you want to. This might not be the best, but you got the idea how you can use it. So let's play again the hide. We have no transition over here. Let's apply default one. So yeah, now the video seems very chubby, and that is for sure because kind of we push it a lot. So let's reduce it to make it a bit slowly. That's gonna look good. So the result kind of look good. Let's also reduce the musical. So that's it. So yeah, I mean literally save the project, it automatically. Now let's learning how to render the video. To render the video, all you have to go to File and then click on Export and then click on Media. Now when you export it, it's gonna show you these windows. Now usually whenever we are uploading it to YouTube, Instagram, or any of the platform, we tend to use here the format which is the H264 Blu-ray or the H2. Usually we tend to use this one which is standard, but if you are having this a higher footage, you can use her HVAC too. But normally for content creator we tend to use this. And then once you select, it's gonna select her match high bitrate, which is a default setting. You don't have to play around with this unless you are sure about why we are using this quality. But oftentimes if you want to run the default sequence, you would keep it as a match source and then output location where you would like to save. Now I'm gonna save here in this Premiere Pro basic folder, so it's Premiere Pro and then click save. Now if you have rendered some of this media in the timeline, like as I mentioned, you can use our use preview to smooth the rendering experience and then click on export, and that's all you have to do. Now the rendering is complete. Let me show you the final output. This was the final output. Let's just double tap on the video. So that's it. I hope you guys learned some of the basic tool to get you started with Adobe Premiere. Now, of course, it's gonna take a bit of a time with practice by learning. I mean, this is not everything in Premiere Pro. This was just to guide you with the very basic. But as you move along, make sure you watch the other videos too, like learning tips and tricks to make editing flow faster. If something makes you confused, you can always there is a YouTube, you can search it. But yeah, this video is just to guide you from the very scratch, from the very beginner, to just to get you started for everything. So I hope you guys like this video. So thank you so much for sticking around with me this whole time.